Well, thank you, Dr. Campbell, for inviting me to answer some questions. We've been friends for 25, 30 years now. For those of you who haven't had a chance to meet me, my name is Dr. John McDougall. I'm a medical doctor and a board-certified internist. And one of the things that Dr. Campbell and I share together is the intense interest in the truth, regardless of our personal consequences. So thank you for giving me a chance to talk to your audience.
Well, thank you, John. It's a real pleasure, I have to say that. Dr. McDougall, you've spent many, many years being a pioneer, working to improve medical practice. I'm curious, what really motivated you personally to go into the practice, and where did you get your medical training?
Oh, as far as me becoming a doctor, I think my mother always wanted to have a doctor as a son. And I have to believe that was deeply embedded in me. However, I never thought I could aspire to that, because in our family, doctors were next to God. And we were just a basic low-income family. And I never realized that I could fulfill that kind of position until I had a personal, serious meeting with the medical business. And that happened when I was 18 years old. At age 18, I had suffered a lot of problems as a child: constipation, stomach pains, acne, fatigue. I was a pretty sick kid. But at age 18, it kind of came together with a pretty dramatic event. I had a massive stroke, which paralyzed the entire left side of my body. And that put me in the medical business. I went to the hospital. I spent 2 weeks at Grace Hospital in Detroit. After 2 weeks, I could move my thumb this much, so I said it was time to leave. But in the interim, in those 2 weeks, I met physicians. And they would come in to see me, and in my debilitated state, about 1,000 teenagers a year have strokes in the U.S. So it may sound rare, but it really did happen to me. They'd come in and see me, and they did all kinds of tests, angiograms, and I saw all the specialists that were available in Detroit that were available to me. And they would come in, and after a while, I would look at them and I would say the same thing, three things. I'd say, "What's wrong with me? What are you going to do for me? And when am I going to go home?" And every one of them, their response was, I said, "I can do that." So I left the hospital. I went back to college. I soon went into veterinary medicine as a pre-study. And then I said, I could go to medical school. And so after 3 years of college, a year early, I was accepted at Michigan State University in medical school. And it wasn't an easy time. With my challenging personality, I was almost thrown out 2 times. Thank goodness I had an advocate, Dr. Foley, who every time they tried to throw me out, he would stand up and say, no, this guy's got some potential, you keep him in. So after my 4 years of medical school, I met my wife, Mary, and we decided to leave Michigan. Not a bad choice. And we went to Hawaii.
And you had some experiences that I've heard about. You're kind of a challenging guy. So can you elaborate a little bit on how you really got involved in this question concerning plant-based eating, working in Hawaii?
I spent a year as a surgical intern in Hawaii. I single-handedly manned the emergency room for all of Honolulu at the Queens Medical Center. I did some big things when I was just an intern, and I wasn't focused. I really didn't like being a doctor because I didn't see the benefits. I did for acute problems, but not chronic disease, and I quit. And I left my internship, and I didn't want to leave Hawaii. So what I did was I took a job on the Big Island of Hawaii.
And then you were called in by the dean, I think it was, or something like that. You do that again, you're out of here. What was that?
Well, that happened. That happened after my 3 years as a plantation doctor, where I learned how to eat well from my Filipino, Japanese, and Chinese people who lived on rice and vegetables. And I watched their children get fat and sick. So that 3 years of education after my internship was crucial. But I still wasn't happy as a doctor. So part of the reason was I didn't see myself helping people with chronic disease. So I left a sugar plantation job as a physician. I went back to become a board-certified internist. And that was at the University of Hawaii, John Burns School of Medicine. And there I spent a little over 2 years becoming a specialist. And that's, I mean, I told you I almost got thrown out of medical school. I almost got thrown out of residency on a couple of occasions because I knew things. I learned things when I went back into residency. I studied the scientific literature, which is absolutely clear that the rich Western diet kills. And the way to be healthy is to eat a starch-based diet with fruits and vegetables. So I knew this as a young doctor, and I just, had a hard time keeping my mouth shut. I would go in. I remember I went in to see one patient. He had his third heart attack. His wife was there, and I said, look, there's not a big future for you. Let me tell you what I've learned, and here I'm a resident. So they were so excited. Then their attending came in afterwards, and they told their attending doctor what this young Dr. McDougall resident had said. And the attending went to my chief of medicine, Irv Schatz. And Irv called me in, Dr. Schatz. He said, you embarrassed this doctor by talking about food, which he knew nothing about. And don't you ever do that again. So this was life and death. So I really took a big clamp on my lips. But I got through a little more than 2 years of residency, and after I got my ticket, Irv Schatz called me in, the chief of medicine for the residency, University of Hawaii, and he said, McDougall, he says, I like you. I like your wife and your children. I think you've got a great family, but I'm afraid you're going to starve to death with your crazy ideas about a vegetarian diet. He says, all you're going to collect is a bunch of bums and hippies. So I looked at him and I said, Dr. Schatz, as I pointed to his prospering abdomen, I said, you may be right, but I have to look myself in the mirror. I can't do what you taught me to do in terms of treating chronic disease with drugs and surgery. This is 1978. And then I said something that really became true. I said, I'm not going to collect bums and hippies. I'm going to collect successful people who say to themselves, look at me, I'm so successful. I've built this huge business. I've got this great education. I have this wonderful family. I'm so successful. How come I'm so fat? How come I'm so sick? And I told Dr. Schatz, I said, when these people ask this question, I'm going to be there. And I'm going to tell them the truth. And they're going to say, thank you. Now I have control of the rest of my life. And I can tell you, my practice for the last 40 years has been made up of exclusively successful people. And I don't mean they've all been millionaires or bankers or so on, but they've been successful in terms of they've loved life, and they're willing to reach wherever they have to have it. And fortunately for me and for them, many of them have found my message, which is shared also by you and many of our colleagues, that disease is not a mystery. It's caused by what we eat. We're eating foods of kings and queens, and we're fat and sick like kings and queens. So yeah, it's been a rough, interesting time for me, but I wouldn't have it any other way. I love to fight, and I love the challenge.
Dr. McDougall, some people know that you have spunk in the way you go about things. Where'd you get that from? To any particular person or maybe parent or something? Yeah. Do you have?
Yes, I do. I often tell people when they listen to me and they say he's crazy. I say, well, look, I had a stroke and I'm old. But that's not the case. The case is I had, I'd have to say it was my father and my mother, but particularly my father. My dad was one of the most brilliant, kind, caring people that I've ever had a chance to be with in my whole life. And my parents both taught me, they said, Johnny, and I was a mischievous child, let's say the least. They said, Johnny, whatever you do, I don't care how bad it is, whatever you do, just tell the truth. Wow. So I was raised in an environment where the highest principle is honesty. For good or bad, that has carried with me my whole life. And so when I see dishonesty, which I see in the medical business, in the diet business, every place around me, I just can't keep my mouth shut. And fortunately, I've not become that important that I've been a target for either industry, either the medical or food business. So I've lived a great life. I'm almost 70 years old. I can think of no one who's had the great fortune that I've had in terms of family, in terms of a professional career. And I guess thank goodness that nobody's listened to me, because Nobody attacks me. Contrary to what I know has happened to you, Dr. Campbell, you have been out there and they have gone after you, and I can feel your pain from a distance, thank goodness.
Your story in medicine, John, became intertwined with my interests now 25 years ago, I think it was, when you had a radio program and you had me on your program. And so that was interesting because it was a key part of my transition really into getting serious about this.
Well, I remember that day sitting behind the microphone as the radio show host. I had been on the radio on syndicated, very, very popular radio shows, not just in the San Francisco area, but all over the West Coast. And I was always looking for interesting guests, and the New York Times carried an article about the China study, the most important epidemiologic study of our time. And I got on the phone and I called Dr. T. Colin Campbell and asked if you would be a guest on my show. And you agreed, and you didn't know who I was or what my talents or vested interests were, but you agreed to be on the show. And as we talked, I know we made a bond. And as we talked, you were telling me about the things that you'd learned about how the health of the Chinese. And I remember, I hope I quote you correctly, that those who ate 7% fat were the lowest risk of disease and breast cancer, as opposed to those who ate upwards towards 30% fat. And you're telling me about this great study that you and the Chinese government did, the China study. And maybe 20 minutes into the interview, I said, well, Dr. T. Colin Campbell, you're recommending 30% fat. Would you tell me why, as opposed to 7% fat or 10% fat? And our conversation halted there, paused for maybe 15 to 30 seconds, and you came back and said, as I remember, I never thought about that. And that was, a life changer for you. I'm very happy that I have that landmark in your life. There are people we could spend an hour who I can tell you had opened my eyes, and it was my privilege to, somebody would have probably done it sooner or later, but my privilege to ask you to look at what you had observed from a more, let's just say, less politically correct point of view. And what if we recommended the diet of the rural Chinese, which was essentially what you and I eat today, which is they were eating more than 90% rice at that time. What if we did that? And from that point on, you and I, of course, have been best of personal friends as well as professional colleagues. And even though people who want to, they could say, well, Dr. Campbell recommends different than Dr. McDougall. Essentially, we do not. And we have many other colleagues out there, Dr. Esselstyn, Dr. Greger, Dean Ornish. We're not the sole founders of this information. Shoulders I stand, and as I've talked about, have been Nathan Pritikin, Walter Kempner, Roy Swank of the MS Diet fame, and Dennis Burkitt, who really opened my eyes in 1971. This guy came from, he was touring the country promoting fiber. Dennis Burkitt was a surgeon from Edinburgh, Scotland, who for 17 years headed the Ministries of Health of Uganda. And he came to my medical school when I was a senior medical student, gave a noontime conference that changed my whole life. He told me that in 17 years, taking care of 10 million people, as the head of Ministries of Health, overseeing 1,000 hospitals, that he never saw any colon cancer, obesity, hemorrhoids, varicose veins. He saw one case of gallbladder disease in 17 years and one heart attack.
This is before Hawaii.
This is before Hawaii. Hawaii was 73, 76. This was 1971. He said he saw one heart attack in a judge that came from London. So I went home that day after the noontime conference. This is Mary and I weren't even married then. I went home that day and I said to Mary, I said, you can't believe what I heard. I heard about the importance of fiber. Of course, the Uganda folks eat like you and I do, like they used to. They used to eat a starch-based diet with fruits and vegetables, no dairy and extremely little meat. But all I could hear and all I brought home was I said to Mary, I said, you know what? We're no longer eating white bread. We're just eating brown bread with our bacon and eggs. And that, it opened my eyes, but a little change was made until after I was a plantation doctor, and then I was a resident, and yeah.
John, you may recall some years ago, I think maybe 20 years ago, when you had me on your program, and then a little bit later invited me and my wife Karen and our kids out to stay in your place at Lake Tahoe. Really, really nice vacation for us in a sense. And then we came down and spent some time at your home overnight, and I was particularly interested in getting to know you and what you were all about. And I got into your basement where you were working. And one thing I noticed that I really found intriguing and very exciting was the fact that you took science seriously. I looked up around the walls of the shelf that you had at the top of your basement walls, and you had all these reprints there that you had copied. And so you were obviously a very diligent person when you formed your opinion and when you started writing about it. Can you make a comment or two about your interest in using science to base your ideas on?
Well, this was a big flip-flop in my life. I've never been a reader, novels, anything in particular. I've never been a good reader. And I went through medical school probably reading 3 scientific articles, at most. My memory was really good. Some people say I have a photographic memory. I don't know what you describe it, but I do retain things that I like well. And when I discovered this subject through my exposure to Dennis Burkitt and then my plantation days, when I went back into internal medicine residency, I looked at the science. I went over to the library, and what I saw was amazing. I could hardly wait to devour the next article. We had the Medicus Index back then, no computers. We had the Medicus Index where you take this big book, you look up a subject, and then you find where the articles were published. I would spend hours every day, because it was right on the grounds of the Queens Medical Center where I was doing my residency, hours every day looking through the Medicus Index. And because copies were 10 cents a copy at the library, I had to take them over to the hospital, which was probably 300 yards away, with a hand truck. And there are still breaks in the steps of the library that I put there from banging the hand truck on the steps. So I started reading the literature with passion, and I'll tell you one reason why. It's because power in medicine comes from knowledge. If you're a banker, it's how much money you got. If you're a real estate agent, it's how much land you own. If you're a physician, it's how much you know. And so I wanted to win the game, just like everybody does. And so I just put chip after chip after chip in my bank, which is the scientific literature. Now, not only did I get excited about diet, and I didn't even know if I wanted to be a doctor at that time. This is my residency. I was still floundering around thinking, is this my place? Not only did I get excited about nutrition and health, but I wanted to know everything every other doctor knew. I wanted to know everything about bypass surgery, everything about chemotherapy, everything about MS drug treatment. I wanted to know everything, so that when I sat down with the experts, the world experts, they would sit down with me and we'd have a conversation. About 10 minutes into it, they'd look at me and they'd say, "You know as much about this as I do." And I would say, "Of course I do, otherwise I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you." And that's what I encourage every other young doctor, every other doctor who wants to take this serious, is not only do you don't have to know the facts about the human diet, you must know everything your opponents or your friends or whatever you want to call them, everything they know. Otherwise they'll dismiss you. "Oh, you don't even know that heart surgery doesn't save lives. You're a pretty stupid guy. I'm not going to listen to your food garbage." You gotta know it all. So that's why I became passionate. I collected files and files of relative scientific information. Of course, I don't do that anymore. I just store them on my computer. But yeah, that's what you could say about me. And I read a few more novels, very selectively. Mary reads novels. Mary, my wife and partner, reads novels. And I have a stack of journals, real journals, still sitting on my end table. And in addition, I probably spend 1 to 3 hours a day reading research.
I've heard you speak many times, Dr. McDougald, and one of the more significant lectures you gave, I think, at least from my perspective, that you asked was, "Why do you need a doctor?" Can you elaborate on that a little bit? Why did you say that? You're a doctor.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like, why do you need a doctor? It's like, the worst times in my life is when I have attorneys working for me. And I certainly don't want to know morticians. And I'm not so sure about CPAs either. Seems like I'm always in trouble. Ladies and gentlemen, you do not want to know physicians, because if you do, you're in trouble. So your goal should be to stay away from doctors, doctors' offices, hospitals. Sick people are there. You don't want to be a sick person. You don't want to have to be in the market of buying their wares, heart surgery, dialysis machines, blood pressure pills. That's not where you want to be. And the only way I know to get out of these businesses is to get healthy. And the only way I know to get healthy for 90% of the people is to fix the problem. And the problem is the food. People are suffering from food poisoning, and they're dying. And it's just plain and simple, and it's easy to cure by the kind of diet that Dr. Campbell, Dr. Esselstyn, Dr. Bernard, a whole bunch of our colleagues present and our mentors of the past have recommended. It's so stupid simple. It is so cost-free that everybody misses it. If there was a profit behind it, like, heart surgery can cost you $300,000. There's these diabetic medications, they cost you actually $23,000 a year. If I could make that kind of profit from selling you potatoes or rice or corn or sweet potatoes, everybody in the world would know about this. That's the problem.
You've had impact on a lot of people with your message, and you've been at it a long time, and I know now you've got some of your children involved, and your wife, of course, Mary. Could you tell me a little bit about what role they're playing in your practice?
It has actually been a cooperation between the most phenomenal female person that I've ever met in my whole life. To be plain and simple, is meeting Mary back in 1971 changed my life. It gave me a best friend that never let me down. It gave me a partner that could take my impracticality, in other words, to tell people to eat rice and corn and beans and to give up meat and dairy, took my impractical message and turned it around and developed more than 3,000 recipes that are published in books on the internet and so on. So there are many people whose shoulders I stand on. Walter Kempner, Nathan Pritikin, Roy Swank, Dennis Burkett. I've met most of these people. I haven't met Walter Kempner, never met him. He was single. But they never had a Mary. That's the problem. They knew much more than I did about this subject, were much more intelligent. I know that. But they didn't have a Mary. That was the difference. And so Mary and I, it's called the McDougall Program, and she and I co-author almost every book. There are a couple that I did with just my name on it, but she and I built this empire together. Her in her very quiet, comfortable manner, and me in my abrasive, somebody called me prickly a couple of days ago, in my manner, and we just made a team that moved forward. We had the good fortune to not only love each other, but to love our children and have a great, great relationship as we do today, 40 years later, with our children. They all went through the problems that children and teenagers and young adults go through. I mean, if they didn't, they wouldn't be normal kids. Yeah, really. So they've been through all that. When I tell people who have growing families and they get very frustrated by the fact that things are not tranquil, there are big waves out there in the ocean, I say, you have to wait until they're 33. When they get to be about 33, they finally get it settled. And my last son is now 33. Well, I have two sons, my last child. Our daughter, Heather, she had a very enjoyable teenage life and young adult life, and she really went to college, really couldn't figure out what to do. But she knew what she wanted to do. She wanted to work with Mom and Dad. And there were times when I said, Mary, why do we employ her? She's really not very worthwhile. But that changed as the years went by, and now Heather runs everything. She's probably 41 years old. She runs everything. I'm just the talent. She says, okay, Dad, it's your time to get on stage. I do nothing else. She runs the business, she runs the website. It's a phenomenal thing to see your children to grow into adults. My first son is a PhD in chemistry. He is extremely well educated, has a wonderful job, a wonderful life, but is not involved in our businesses. My second son, third child, he's the doctor. He's a medical doctor. And it was a kind of a rough road for him because he had to live under my shadow. And he had to know all these things. He did. He was raised on this diet. He had to attend Dad's lectures. He sold books at our lectures. I mean, he knew all this his whole life. And so he goes to undergraduate and then gets accepted to medical school. And he listens to the big profs tell him about how to practice medicine. And he has this knowledge. So he tells me he goes to this kidney disease lecture. And the professor talked about the harm of high-protein diets and the physiology of kidneys and how a diet plays an extremely important role in the development of kidney stones, causes kidney stones and kidney failure and all kinds of autoimmune kidney diseases. And the professor talks all about this. My son's sitting there in his chair waiting. Oh, well, they're going to put it all together, aren't they? And he gets to the end of the lecture. All the other students are nodding. He's sitting there. Wait a minute. You know, where's the bottom line? Why didn't you tell, even though you gave all the individual facts, why didn't you put it together and say what he and I and other people who have basic knowledge know? Why didn't they say, you know, the reason people are sick is because they eat the high protein, high fat, high cholesterol, immune stimulating, autoimmune causing, rich Western diet, and that we can cure our patients by feeding them rice, corn, potatoes, beans, peas, lentils. So it's tough for him, and it continued to be tough for him, and I just want to tell you one other really important personal story. He was in residency to become a board-certified internist. And again, he had to kind of keep his head down, and I told him, I always told students, we teach medical students, I tell them, look, don't say anything. They have life and death power over you, your bosses. Don't say a thing. Residents, okay, they can say something, because they already got their license. So Craig brought the head of internal medicine into a conference between he and myself. It was a Skype conference. He was with the head of internal medicine at OHSU, and we were talking about diabetes. The first part of the conversation, I talked about how aggressive treatment of diabetes kills. And that's what all the research says. And the professor, it has to do nothing but nod. That's correct. These diabetic pills, they kill people. They do not save lives. They lower blood sugar, but they kill people. And he said, yeah. And of course, type 1 diabetics have to take insulin. But we talked about the Accord Advance and Veteran Study published in the New England Journal of Medicine 2008. And all three of these studies show aggressive treatment kills. There's no other research out there that says otherwise of any importance. So we get done with that conversation, and then we go on to the issue of diet and the cause and treatment of type 2 and type 1 diabetes. Let's just leave type 1 out. And type 2. Type 2 diabetes is always caused by the rich Western diet, which makes you fat, always by definition. And it's also 100% curable, type 2 diabetes is. And so we're talking about that, and then there was a silence from the head of internal medicine, OHSU. He had nothing to say. And this was an aha moment for my son, because even though he heard me say these things, and he heard and these people, they're nice people, they're well-intentioned, they're very knowledgeable, nothing personal against them, but he heard there was nothing coming from the other side. And so we finished the Skype call, and I get a call 10 minutes later, and he says, Dad, I get it, but I have one problem with what you and Mom do. He says, that is, why don't you just feed your patients sweet potatoes and broccoli? They would do better. And I said, son, you're right. But, you know, Mom and I decided, it was probably 30 years ago then, it's been 40 years now, we decided that we wanted to make a livable program. So we have brownies and chocolate pudding, and we give them a little salt and sugar. And as I say, Mary's published 3,000 recipes. But he's absolutely right. They would do better if we just had them sweet potatoes and broccoli. You know, you have to make some compromises along the way. You want people to do what you do and do what you recommend. So that's been the development of my son. He is a a practicing board-certified internist in Portland. He does what I do as an outpatient. Frustration is high. But once you know the truth, there's nothing else you can do. You know, he can't go on and drug people. There's an ethical issue of being a doctor. And doctors who find out the truth, they have to deal with ethics principles. And most of them can't do with any level of comfort. Sometimes they have to keep the doors open. They can't do what they're taught to do in medical school. And they always try. My brother is a board-certified internist. My son, so many other young doctors, your son. You know, they know the truth. Sometimes they have to take the attitude, well, they're not going to do it, so I have to give them the blood pressure drugs and the diabetic pills and so on. And I do have to pay the bills, and I have to keep shoes on the kids, and I understand that. But never do they do it with a clear conscience. They always know what the right thing is to do, and they always strive to do the right thing. And someday we'll live in a world where what they do is not only appreciated, it's demanded that doctors practice this way. Those who don't will go to jail.
John, what do you see for the future of this field? Where do you think we're going? Do you see any promise?
Oh man, the future is, well, let me start with the past. When I discovered this in the 1970s, we had the dietary goals, the McGovern report, come out in 1977, which said basically what you and I know to be true. So in 1977, the Senate Select Committee on Nutrition came out and said that we should eat more whole grains, more fruits, more vegetables, less meat, less dairy, at least whole fat dairy and sugar and so on. And I thought, wow, that's it, that's it. The pendulum has, because before that was the Atkins diet in '72. Right. So I said, oh man, we're on a roll and the pendulum is just never going to stop. It's just going to, boy, I couldn't have been so wrong. Because by the end of 1977, the year that the publication of the dietary goals for the U.S., by the end of that year, the lobbyists from the meat and dairy industry had destroyed the dietary goals of the U.S. and republished them. Surgeon General came out, C. Everett Koop in '85, and told Americans the same thing. You're killing yourselves with the food from the meat and dairy industry, and there's a solution. Well, they killed that too. The food industry, big food, learned from big tobacco. Luther Terry in 1964 put out the Surgeon General's report on smoking and health in the U.S. Destroyed the tobacco industry in the United States. It went from half the population smoking to fewer than 20%. So the food industry saw what happened to big tobacco, and so big food said, this will not happen to me. And so they have worked since the early 70s. They have worked with every dollar they can put together, with every influence that they can make on politics, on schools, on medical schools. They have done everything they can to make sure that they didn't follow in the steps of big tobacco, and they have won. But things are turning back. The pendulum is swinging again because of these little devices that the adults and teenagers carry around, the phones and the computers. And so information is spread freely, and the liars and cheaters and polluters can't hide as easily. But they have all the money. So when we put out the truth, or the truth occurs in a journal, they're just right back there with their propaganda to keep the dollars flowing into the fast food restaurants and the supermarket shelves. And they've learned that even though somebody like myself or somebody like you, Dr. Campbell, comes out and tells the truth, they know, yeah, we can fix that. We just run a few Super Bowl ads and we can bury these people, and they have been able to. But, there's no matter how many people die, no matter how big the hospitals get, no matter the fact that 70% of adults are on drugs, no matter the fact that our military is fat and sick and unable to defend us, you know, all those things that you would think would count, your spouse dying, your children fat and sick and dying, your mom and dad dying of heart disease and breast cancer. It doesn't matter. It really doesn't. You know, I would think it would. But there's one thing that's happening that it does matter, and she doesn't care. And that's Mother Nature. She doesn't care. She doesn't care how much money the dairy industry makes. She is right there marching along with answering environmental destruction and global warming with rising oceans, floods, droughts, etc. And she's not going to stop. Now, how much time do we have? Well, you and I have seen changes in our short lives of 70, 80 years. We've seen huge change. Since I was a little boy in the 1950s, 90% of the fish are gone. 90% of our ocean life is gone. So how much time do my children, your children, and their grandchildren have? I don't know, but there's going to be a meeting day here soon where, and it's already happened. I mean, China, our dietary guidelines for Americans, the USDA and primarily the USDA publishes them. The USDA works for agribusiness. 2015, 2020, they still heavily promote agribusiness in this country. Yeah, they mention that, saturated fat and cholesterol, there's something to pay attention, a little bit, not even less now. They remove the upper limits of cholesterol, and they really say you can eat as much fat as you want. That's the US dietary guidelines. But in China, the dietary guidelines that just came out said that Chinese citizens have to cut their meat intake in half. So there are countries around the world who, by demand of their citizens or a higher moral level, who are willing to tell their citizens the truth. But that's not the case in the US. So you ask me what the future is? I really don't think you and I have any control over what it is. We can try and do our part. Every day, you and I get up and our colleagues get up and we say, we can't be quiet. We've got to try. And we hope that what we say makes a difference. And the way I look at it is this, when we do come out of darkness, that we will be the leaders who guide people into the right direction for the future. But there's a lot of darkness ahead of us. And if you don't think so, yeah, turn your TV on and look around you. But when we come out of darkness, you and I need to be there to lead the population and the world to what the truth is so that we can have a sustainable future for our kids and grandkids and their grandkids. That's our importance, is to stay alive and well and keep our message alive and well for the day when change will take place.
Dr. McDougall, there's many conferences in this field now, all kinds of people putting on conferences of various kinds, and you've certainly done your share in having a lot of very exciting conferences. I've spoken at several, as you know. And also at the same time, we in this field are kind of interested in promoting it, and there's various ways of doing it, and a lot of people are doing it in various and sundry ways. Do you have any ideas on what might be the best way to promote this message?
Yeah, there is a way to advance the message. And there are a couple of ways, which I've tried, and I know you've tried. One way is to call upon our congressional leaders, our governmental leaders, to do their job. The job of government, there are a lot of people out there that are anti-government, but the job of government is to protect us from foreign and domestic threats. In other words, Ford Motor Company or IBM, they don't organize a military to protect us from foreign countries. It requires the US government to do that. Nobody would argue that. That's to protect us from foreign threats. The government also has a job to protect us from domestic threats. And so they have tried with the dietary goals of the US in 1977 and other efforts. They have tried to protect us from the meat and dairy industry. They need to do more. Unfortunately, money runs politics, and people can be bought cheaply. So yeah, we need to get the government involved. I have done a couple of things with the government in my career. I got a law passed in the early 1980s on informed consent, which forced physicians to tell women their options in terms of breast cancer treatment. There are over 19 states that now have these laws, but doctors don't abide by them. They just do amputations or whatever they want. But the law is there to tell women that there's no survival advantage no matter what kind of surgery they have. So I did that in the early 80s, and then in 2011 I tried again. I went to the California government, and I testified before a Senate committee on the need to educate doctors and medical students about human nutrition. When I walked in there to the Senate meeting, they said, you know, McDougald, stop wasting our time. We're not going to pass any more laws against doctors. I said, look, I drove all the way from Santa Rosa. Give me a couple of minutes. And so they gave me 45 minutes. And in 45 minutes, I had them going from no to yes. And it came out of committee. The bill was SB 380. It came out of committee, and that was early 2011. In the spring of 2011, it was passed unanimously by both houses of the California Congress, unanimously. And in September of 2011, it was signed by Governor Jerry Brown. It is a law in California that our 11 medical schools must teach nutrition to medical students, and doctors must learn about human nutrition. It is law. However, they gave the implementation of the law to the medical board in California. And through various meetings, and I spent some time trying to influence those meetings, what the Medical Board of California decided to do is to fulfill the law by putting a paragraph in their newsletter once a year about nutrition. So we can try and get our government to do its job. The other thing we can do, just like Elon Musk has done with Tesla, is we can build a better mousetrap. You know, we can build a more economically rewarding system that does the right thing. Kaiser Permanente is a wonderful model for how this could happen. But unfortunately, it's staffed by doctors who have learned to practice medicine from the drug companies and the surgical companies and so on. And they're afraid of being sued by stepping out of line. They're afraid of being criticized by their colleagues, their doctors are. Even though the model is there to do less to keep people healthy, makes more money for Kaiser. So what we need to do is we need to have somebody, you know, like Elon Musk did, and of Tesla and SpaceX. We need to have somebody that's strong enough, bold enough, wealthy enough to stand up and say, I don't care, I'm going to do the right thing. And they need to build an infrastructure, a healthcare system that rewards the doctors. You know, right now a bypass surgeon makes $500,000 or $1 million a year for doing the wrong thing. I want to have a system where a general doctor, like your son or my son, makes $500,000 a year by doing the right thing. In other words, let's give them 5,000 people, and let's give them $1 million to take care of them, or $2 million, and tell them, look, this is your money. You can spend it as you want. And what's left you get to keep for your family, put shoes on the kids. Yeah, that system has been tried. Sure. And it can be tried again. It was beat by the hospitals and the insurance companies. But that system needs to be tried. You need to find some way to reward good instead of bad. People listening to us can probably think of a dozen other models where acting properly brings wealth, as opposed to what's being done now by the drug companies, the surgical companies. You know, the world of medicine is well, healthcare. That's what they call it, a misnomer. Sickness. The sickness business is the only growing segment of the economy in the U.S., and it's funded by borrowing money from China.
John, you know, in medical practice and biomedical research, as we professionals at least talk about nutrition, usually one factor at a time, and of course the public too. I mean, we all do this. We talk about the role of nutrition in health, involving one nutrient, maybe one mechanism, one kind of outcome, and that's the nature of the game. That's where the money is. The money is attached to something very specific when we make products. But in reality, we also know that nutrition doesn't really work that way. nutrition works where you've got multiple things, countless things, operating through countless mechanisms to produce a whole seamless series of what we call diseases. That's nature. And that's not where the money is. So we have these contrasting views. On the one hand, we got medical practice, which is focused on one thing at a time. That's what it is. On the other hand, the thing that makes the most difference to people's health is nutrition. It's not one thing at a time. It doesn't work that way. How do you rationalize those two ideas?
Well, you remember better than I do because you have the advantage of 12 years on me. But you remember the time when the miracles in medicine were curing scurvy, beriberi, pellagra. And we did that with the discovery of vitamins, and then business came along, and rather than getting these vitamins from corn and potatoes and rice that has not been refined, and fruits and vegetables, what industry did is they isolated nutrients and concentrated them, put them in packages and sold them to people. And so everybody got the idea, because we did cure scurvy and beriberi and pellagra. We did with these pills. We could have done it, and we did with fruits and vegetables. But the world, the scientists, the doctors, my mom and dad, they looked at this as miracles, and they said, well, if we can cure these deadly diseases that plague the world, we can cure heart disease, and we can cure cancer with the same approach. And since then, of course, the profits are huge for those who take this point of view. You know, even isolating common drugs from plants, like aspirin, salicylic acid, and digitalis from the foxglove plant. And, you know, that's the approach that we have taken. And the result has been huge profits, but not best medicine. You can't take all the isolated nutrients, and people try this with multivitamin pills or polypharmacy in terms of blood pressure pill treatment or diabetic treatment. They have a pill that does, you know, combines this drug with that drug and so on. You can't fix the problem by these isolated pharmaceutical ingredients. Can't possibly do it. It's like taking a smoker and giving them smoker's vitamins and trying to prevent lung cancer. It's just bizarre, but that's what not only are the businesses doing, but the public is looking for. I want to have bacon and eggs this morning. I'm going to have an extra egg, but I'll take an extra Lipitor statin. Profitable, maybe, quote, easier for the patient, not in the long run, because they're just fat, sick people carrying around a bag full of drugs. That's all they are. Until you look at it from the point of view and you get a little religious maybe, or a little philosophical, and you say to yourself, you know, I'm really not as smart as nature or God or whatever, and neither are any other scientists. And we have to look at 400,000 years of evolution, and we have to say, we couldn't, it's impossible. Even if we develop an atomic bomb that'll destroy the entire planet, we can't possibly fix what Mother Nature has made right over 400 million years. It's not possible. And we have to kind of humble ourselves and step back and say, we have to rely upon corn and whole grain rice and potatoes and fruits and vegetables to fix our cholesterol problems and our heart disease and prevent colon cancer and type 2 diabetes and even type 1 diabetes and the other autoimmune diseases, because they're caused in large part by autoimmune reactions to animal proteins. We have to humble ourselves, us as doctors and scientists and big business people, and say there's no possible way that we can do what Mother Nature has done in terms of designing a perfect system, which is, you know, people say holistic or whole food plant-based diet, or whole is the big word. That's the answer. I don't care if we do survive as a species for another 200 years and fulfill Star Trek's destiny. I always like to watch Star Trek because it gives me a future that I would like to see. Whether we survive into the 23rd century or not, we will never be able to synthesize a pill that replaces a potato.